This is going to be a brand new notes document. So when you download it, then open new tab in Cami. You should not see the option to select. And as always, if you miss something in the notes, there will be an Edpuzzle recording later. And as we have done, as we move from section to section previously, I want to point out the objective that is most front and center here, and not surprisingly, that is the consequences of globalization. That will help us prepare for the next two objectives. As we look at consequences, we're going to be doing that for, I think, at least the next two class periods. We're going to see that there is a mix of good and bad, positive and negative. Now, we'll start off with some positive. We're going to move back and forth between positive and negative, but I want to start positive. Trade did increase. It increased about 3% every year for about a century. Now that's an average. And that may not sound like a lot. But because of something I hope you'll learn about in personal finance called compounding interest, that means that trade grew by about 2,000% or 20 times. And so there was 20 times more trade at the end of that century than there was at the beginning. That's a lot. Another way to think about it is in terms of its impact on GDP. It's part of why we needed to review GDP. Its impact, its contribution to global domestic product, the value of all the goods and services, right, all the economic activity, the investment, the government spending, all of that, right, it grew from 6% of GDP to 14%. So nearly 2.5 times. And for countries that, one, were able to and did actually choose to participate in this trade, right, they got richer. I suppose since I'm recording this, I should use the mouse, the cursor to indicate. So our big trading countries, Great Britain, of course, leading the way, has not only the biggest GDP, which is important, but remember, countries differ in size. What's going to be more important here is per person GDP. If we divide that total by the population, and this is all in 1990 international price dollars, don't worry about what all of that means, but it means we can compare apples to apples when we talk about this. Germany also engaging in trade. France, to a lesser extent, little Belgium, doing a lot of international trade. We'll find out they were also doing some pretty nasty stuff, at least their king was, in Africa. But, right, small country, very much engaged in trade and very rich. Right, large empires, right, large land empires like Russia, Austria-Hungary, not doing as much trade and not nearly as wealthy. Staying with the positive for a little while, the living standards for middle and upper class Westerners, right? So people from Europe, and in European settled states like Canada and the United States, were going up, right? Their standards of living improved. Right? One of the statements that kind of makes this case for how good things had gotten for the middle and upper class comes from John Maynard Keynes. Right? Now, he's a famous economist. You will see him again if you pay attention to economic news. Right? At any point in your life, his name will probably pop up year after year after year. And he said, right, writing in our time period, the inhabitant of London could order by telephone, sipping his morning tea in bed, the various products of the whole earth in such quantity as he might see fit, and reasonably expect their early delivery upon his doorstep. I mean, this sounds like he could be talking about Amazon Prime in the glory days before the COVID-19 pandemic, right? When you could order something and you could get it the very next day, right? Or 2 days was standard Prime delivery. Right? It wasn't quite that fast, right? But by the standards of the day, it was lightning quick. Pretty impressive. What made possible this abundance? Well, a couple things. Well, actually 3. Yes, Thatcher.
After you finish with the slide, can you go back
Yep.
to the first one?
Yep, I will do it. Thank you, Thatcher. That is a good solution. All right, the Industrial Revolution, global trade, and the resulting global competition. All right, start with the Industrial Revolution. This is the mass production of goods, which in turn requires some other things to make it possible. One is interchangeable parts. Something boring, right, that does not sound mystical to us at all, but was a tremendous development. And this lowly concept is that one part would fit all of the products using that same part. That almost sounds nonsensical in its simplicity. So let's have an example here from the world of firearms. All right, part 2 in that parts diagram, which is the barrel. Right there. Part 2 would fit all Smith & Wesson Model 15 pistols. And the rest of it would fit all Model 15 pistols. So if Cole likes the Model 15 pistol, but he wants a longer barrel, he just specifies that he wants a different barrel, and all they have to do is put a different one on. Everything else remains the same, right? And if Cole later wants to switch it, he can. Right?
Nice.
It is nice, and at the time it was magical, right? Because right, everything you're making gets to use identical parts. Now we'll get to some more of the magic, and it will maybe become less magical.
Magic always gets less magical when you explain it.
Yeah, I know. All right, and that's what's going to happen here. Because that allows assembly line production. Unskilled workers are a key to this. Okay. And this is where the magic starts to wear off, right? Cole's pistol seems less magical when he finds out it's not being made by a skilled craftsperson, right? Making it with love and care just for Cole. It's not. It's made by somebody who really doesn't have skills. Right? Because you don't need them. Right? Because you have interchangeable parts. Each worker does the same thing over and over again to contribute their part to the finished product. So there will be somebody who threads the barrel into the receiver on Cole's Model 15 Smith & Wesson. And then they'll send it on down the line to the next person. So, a couple of examples. One, we've got people assembling doorknobs and locks. Right? But let's use the car example. Right? One worker takes a wheel, puts it on the front right of, or the front driver's side of the car. Right? And then another worker fastens it on with lug nuts. And they send it on down the line. It just keeps moving. That's made possible by interchangeable parts. There's no fiddling with making sure the wheel fits. The wheel fits. Right? They're all the same. When we put these two things together, right, the interchangeable parts and assembly line production, right, it allowed goods to be made far faster, right, and far cheaper. And again, interchangeable parts meant that finished goods could be made by people without any skills. Yes, Thatcher.
I'm sorry for interrupting again, but I need to use the bathroom.
Okay, yep, run the, let's see, I think Josh still has the code. Okay. And, right, if it sounds like I'm repeating that point, I am, right? And I'm repeating it because what that leads to is the workers themselves becoming basically interchangeable. They can be replaced immediately if they get hurt, right? If you fire them, or if they quit. Right? Or, let's face it, if they get killed on the job, because that happens in dangerous work like steelworks. You can just go right off onto the street and find the next unemployed person looking for work. And that means you don't have to pay them very much. Because all you need for them to do is to have, the phrase used to be, a strong back and a weak mind. If you also pay attention to the photos, you can find out they can be children, right? And then you can pay them even less. And finally, we add in global trade. Global trade meant competition between businesses on a global scale, which had its own consequences. We're going to see some things we already met before. Comparative advantage and the invisible hand of the market mean that we get the best goods, right, at the cheapest prices. Now, we don't always actually get the best goods. Some of the stuff made in this time period was not only not high quality, but in terms of like food products and such, could be really actually pretty disgusting and unsanitary. But for the most part, we did get better goods at lower prices. It's also put pressure on businesses, and this will start maybe to sound like some of that kind of Marxist talk, and it fits, right, to keep prices low, which meant they also had to keep their production costs low. And so we see this, right? Imported clocks, right? You get scissors made in the U.S., made in Germany, made in England, right? English fine china competing with American-made dishes, for example, and Sears Roebuck, the cheapest supply house on earth. Our trade reaches around the world, right? It's global. And I am aware of the time. We'll be all right. Results of these three things, global trade, competition, and the Industrial Revolution, mix of good and bad. Right? One, we get an abundance of cheaper goods for the middle class and the upper class. As shown in these images, also in your notes. But we get poverty and bad working conditions for the working class. All right, that's the last thing on your notes. Get that in if you need to submit them after this hour. They will not be counted late. And, of course, this is being recorded, so you can get it later if you have to. And, again, sorry that we got everything kind of out of kilter this class period. All right, thank you for your patience, guys. Have a good day. I will see you tomorrow.